Hello, I'm Michael Harbridge from Royal and Langnickel Brush, and I want to thank you for stopping by to watch this video. It's all about brushes. I'm going to talk to you about brush selection, different types of brushes, different hair types, best uses, and brush care. There is a PDF that goes along with this that you can download and print out or save. It has information about the anatomy of a brush, the different parts of a brush, very helpful when you're talking to your students. And then there's information about each of those parts of the brush. On the next page, you'll have information about different shapes, specialty brushes. There's a section on brush care. There's a section on troubleshooting Q&A, some of the most common questions that I encounter. And then on the last page, there is a chart. And so this is broken down. It's color-coded by best quality, better, good, and economy by color. And then it has the different brush series, what type of brush it is, the handle length. We'll talk about short and standard and long handles. The handle material, what it's made of, that's very important. We'll talk about that. And the hair types. There's lots of different hair types, whether they're natural or synthetic. What grade level is it most appropriate for? The best use for that bristle, and then what else can it be used with? A lot of times in the classroom, you can't afford to buy separate brushes for watercolor and separate ones for acrylics and separate for tempera and separate for ceramics. And so this kind of gives you other options of what they can also be used with. I want to talk to you first about brushes and kind of different levels of brushes. This one you'll find quite often in really inexpensive watercolor kits. And this is an all plastic handle. It's molded plastic, and then there's these little, I call them spikes, sticking out on the end. And it looks like somebody took a scissors and chopped off that end, and they probably did, and they didn't even do a good job with this one to get that even. This brush is okay for like glue or something that's disposable, but really this is not a good brush. Going up from there, you'll find ones like this, and these are often found in watercolor sets as well. And this is like a 5-cent brush. It's an all plastic handle. The ferrule of the brush is also plastic, and then usually the hair is real soft and not very good quality. These are very flexible. These two are kind of a disposable brush. That really soft hair will work with watercolor, but not a real good quality brush, not something that's going to last. From there, you start going up into brushes that maybe have plastic handles. They have a metal ferrule. They might have wood handles as well. And then the brush head, and there's different hair types that you'll find in those. And the handle we'll talk about first. Handles are really important in the classroom because you've probably encountered wood handle brushes where the paint is all flaking off of the handles, and the head, the ferrule on the brush might be wobbly. And that usually, on a wood handle brush, if it gets left in water, that wood will absorb moisture, and then it expands as it absorbs the moisture. When the brush dries, that handle shrinks back down, and then it has stretched out the paint that's on the handle, and then the paint starts flaking off. A lot of times the head comes loose on there, and the ferrule, so the ferrules are usually some form of metal. They might be aluminum, they might be brass, and they might have different colors, but there are different grades of aluminum. So on really inexpensive brushes, you're going to have a lower grade of aluminum that can stretch and break much easier. So on a really inexpensive wood handle brush, when that wood expands, if it's a really low grade aluminum that's used, that aluminum may actually stretch as the wood expands, and it may crack that. And so then when the handle shrinks, that aluminum of the ferrule is stretched out, and then the head falls off because the handle shrinks back down. So I always encourage teachers in the classroom, try to get plastic or acrylic handles on your brushes, because if those get left in water, they can't absorb moisture and they won't swell up, and you won't have flaking paint. So that's one of the main things when you're looking at brushes. Look for acrylic handles or plastic. Now, some of you may say, oh no, I'm very diligent about not letting the kids leave them in water. And that may be the case, and that's wonderful that you do that. But what about that day that you have a substitute teacher and they're not as diligent as you are, or some other teacher borrows your brushes, because that never happens, and they leave them sitting in water. Or you have some students that just throw them in the sink in water and they leave them in there. So try to get acrylic and plastic handles. Let's talk about handle length. And I'll talk specifically more about a lot of these brushes, but there are short handles, standard handles, and then there are long handles. So why are there different handle lengths? The real short handles usually are for kids with smaller hands, younger artists. They might be miniature painting brushes. They will have shorter handles. Standard handle is the most common. Standard handles are for when you're working on a surface. So if I'm working on the table, I'm generally going to use a standard handle brush or a short handle brush. Long handles are designed for when you're working standing up and you're working on a canvas, on an easel. That longer handle length gives you better perspective, so your face isn't buried in that canvas, that you can hold the brush and do your painting more from a distance. I don't recommend long handle brushes for young artists, because these, as they're painting with them and they're standing up, they're going to be poking themselves in the eye. They might decide these work great as swords or for poking other students. So generally, standing up, better perspective, most common, shorter handles, younger artists. Now, can you use this brush with older students? Absolutely. I have middle and high school teachers that use our big kids brushes with their students as well. So the big kids and our soft grip brushes are basically the same brush, just a different color and longer handle. Now, let's look at different hair types, because this is where it starts to get really kind of overwhelming with the different hair types. Natural hair. So even within the natural hair family, there are different types of hair and different stiffnesses. So all of these brushes here are all natural hair. And you might be saying, well, they all look like basically the same hair, but they're not. And so there are really soft, fluffy brushes. All of these real soft, fluffy brushes, this is goat hair. And so goat hair, every one of these, okay, I'm going to set those aside. Every one of these are goat hair. And this is a great bristle because it's so soft and so fluffy. It's great for watercolors and doing washes. It's great for ceramic underglazes and glazes because it lays that color on nice and smooth. It's not a stiff bristle that's going to drag those colors out. How many times have you had kids say, oh yeah, I put 3 coats of glaze on and their piece is really streaky and really rough? It's because either they didn't let the colors dry, or they used too stiff of a brush that would stretch and drag that color out. So that soft hair, it holds a lot of fluid and a lot of water for watercolor painting. Nice and soft for ceramic glazes and underglazes, gives you really nice even coverage. Now, these are all goat hair, but then we get into different types of hair that are natural, okay? And so these are like a pony, sometimes they'll call it camel hair. It's not really camel hair. Camel is kind of a generic term within the brush industry that's a blend of soft natural hair. So when you see sable or you see camel, that generally, or ox, it's usually a soft bristle. And so even though it's a different color, this brush and this brush, if you were sitting here feeling these, would really feel almost the same and would give the same result. Some teachers like the white hair because it's easier to see the color that the kids are actually working with, where a darker color, sometimes it doesn't show up as well. Now these, I had mentioned, they look very similar to these, but take a look. These are really stiff. And so these 3 brushes are actually hog bristle. And it is also a natural hair. And this is very stiff and flicks back, where this is really soft. If you could touch this to your face, So what are these hog bristle brushes used for? So hog bristle brushes are really designed for heavier bodied acrylics. Some teachers like to use them with tempera paints. They also work well with oils if you work with oils in your classroom, because this bristle is stiff, and so heavier bodied acrylics and oils, it will move the color better. It also is for like dry brushing techniques. If you're kind of skimming across the top of something and just need to hit the highlights with color, that stiffer bristle is good. Stiffer bristled fan brushes are great for stippling techniques. They also, in like on ceramic surfaces, if something is really textured, you may need to use a stiffer bristle brush to get down in that texture, because these soft goat hair brushes can't get down into the textures as well. So you may need to use this to get your first coat of glaze on to get into the textures, or sometimes like crystal glazes where they've got the hard chunks in there. These sometimes are better for scooping up those crystals and applying those on the last coat of the finish. These are not recommended for getting smooth, even coverage with glazes. The stiffer fan brushes are good for speckling. Load them with color. You can flick them back toward the piece and it will give you a nice little splatter effect. This brush may look very similar to these natural goat hair brushes. The difference though, this is a synthetic, but look at how soft and fluffy this is, just like that natural goat hair. Now, why would you want to choose a synthetic over a natural hair? The advantage to the synthetic goat hair is that it's more durable. So if you've ever used fan brushes that are the soft goat hair, they are great, great bristle for ceramic glazes and underglazes. But a lot of times what happens is I get people come back and they say, all of the bristles fell out in the middle of my brush, and I've got bristles on each side, but there's no bristles in the middle, and all that hair must have fallen out. It's not necessarily that the hair fell out. When students are painting, sometimes with fan brushes, they press so hard that that ferrule of the brush, that domed ferrule, will actually scrape on the surface that they're painting, and it will cut the hair away in the middle. Goat hair is a great bristle for watercolors and ceramics and glazes, but it's a very fragile hair. And so goat hair has a tendency to shed, and it also has a tendency to break away, whereas synthetic is much more durable. We developed this synthetic for our beauty line of brushes, for makeup brushes, and it's very, very durable. It doesn't break away as easily and will hold up much better, and you won't get as much shedding. It is just slightly more springy than the natural hair, but awesome brush for watercolors and glazes and things for ceramics. This one here is one of our Zen watercolor brushes, and this too looks and feels like a soft natural hair, but this is actually a synthetic made to mimic like a sable or a camel or an ox hair brush, but it's a synthetic. Again, very, very durable, but nice and soft, great for watercolors and ceramics and things as well. Then, oh, and I want to talk about this bamboo brush. A lot of people like bamboo brushes for working with inks and working with ceramics. Now, what's kind of unique about this brush is it is a real natural bamboo handle, but you'll notice there's no ferrule on bamboo brushes. So the hair is glued into the end of the hollow bamboo. You have to be careful with these that you don't leave them in water, because that bamboo can swell and expand. And when it swells and expands, sometimes it will crack without having a ferrule there, and that can be a problem. So make sure that you don't leave those in water. And you'll see there are white hair ones that are generally goat hair, and then there are brown, there's a brown version that's a little bit different. It's a blend of like a camel or a sable type hair. So that kind of covers natural hair. Then what about synthetic hair? And then we covered some synthetic here as well. But what about gold Tackline? So gold Tackline is one of the most popular bristles in the market because gold Tackline um, is soft enough that you can use it with watercolors. You can use it with ceramic glazes and underglazes, but it'll also work with acrylics. It'll also work with inks, and you can use it with oils. You can use it with heavier bodied acrylics. So it's kind of a middle of the road as far as stiffness. Because it's a synthetic, it's generally pretty darn durable. Um, so a lot of classrooms, they go with gold Tackline. Um, I want to mention too, when you have a brush that's brand new, there's usually a plastic cap on, like rounds and details and liners. That plastic cap can be removed just by gently twisting. Take that off, throw those plastic caps away. If you try to save those and your students try to slide that back onto the brush, there's a good chance they're going to get bristles caught in there. They're going to bend the bristles back, and you're going to start trimming and cutting away hair on the brush, and you don't want to do that. So throw those plastic caps away, or find some other project, whether it's some other craft project, or you can dip these in paint and touch them down and use them as little stamps. That's great, but don't save them for your brushes. Your students will kill the brushes. I've seen adults kill the brushes trying to get those caps back on. So gold Tackline is a nice soft bristle, and there are different grades and different shades. Some are a little darker, some are a little lighter, some are green, some are red, some are orange, yellow, blue. This is just the dyeing process with the bristle. With our big kids brushes, we dyed all of the hair and made color-coded handles so that all of the rounds were green, all of the flats were red, all of the angulars were orange, filberts were yellow, details were blue, specialty brushes were purple. So it's a gold Tackline bristle, good quality brush, acrylic handles. Big kids brushes also have the rubber gripper. And yes, it's good for comfort, but you know what it really works well? Is letting little kids know where to hold the brush. So they're not holding it down here, getting their fingers all full of paint. Teach them that you hold the brush where the gripper is. You don't hold it back here. You have better control when you hold it here. Acrylic handles, they won't swell, crack, and peel. And the hair in these, on most of the sizes, we actually fuse the hair together because it's a synthetic. So we melt it together at the base. So you'll rarely ever lose bristles out of those brushes. So you'll find different colors of gold Tackline, different quality grades. Again, look for the acrylic handles. You can see on this brush, it has a black ferrule. That's just a process of coloring the ferrules. Some of them are gold, some of them are silver. There are different types of ferrules on those brushes. And on a lot of our brushes, you'll find the rubber gripper. Our big kids, our crafter's choice, our soft grip all have rubber grippers on them, all have acrylic handles. You'll find different shapes, different sizes. And again, those are really kind of an all-around good type of brush to work with. There's also another synthetic called white nylon. And sometimes it's called white Tackline, sometimes it's called white nylon. And the difference between this bristle and the gold Tackline is generally the white nylon has a little bit thicker diameter to the hair. So synthetic hair brushes, a good quality synthetic a round brush will come to more of a point. A flat brush or an angular will come to a nice chisel edge when you wet that brush. Unlike, I'm going to refer back to our really cheap brush. Remember when I said this looks like somebody took a scissors and chopped the end off? Because they did. This is like there's hair put in there and then it's chopped off, so it's very blunt on the end. The sign of a better quality brush or a good quality brush is when a pointed brush comes, or a round brush comes to a nice point. The hair on synthetics, on good quality synthetics, are extruded hair. And so just like the hair on your head, if you pull a hair out of your head, the part that comes out of your scalp is going to be more blunt than the tip of your hair is going to come to more of a point. So hair that's extruded and is better quality or good quality should be finer at the tip of that bristle, and then it gets a little bit thicker as it goes back to the part that goes into the brush. So if you're looking at round brushes that don't come to a point or flats that don't come to a nice chisel edge, it's probably not as good of a quality brush when you're looking at synthetics or like a softer natural hair brush. So white is generally a little bit thicker diameter, which makes it a little bit stiffer brush. So what's this good for? Ideal usually for acrylics. Also works with oils are the best uses. You'll also find some that are called like a bone Tackline. And those are actually an even thicker diameter bristle or a blend of thicknesses that make it more to mimic that hog bristle. It's a stiffer bristle, more like a hog bristle, but it's actually a synthetic hair. I want to show you in a workshop that I do, a ceramic workshop. I will hand out tiles to the people in the workshop, and I will give them different brushes. And so somebody is going to get a stiff bristled hog bristle brush. Another person is going to get a small round gold Tackline, and then the last person is going to get a nice soft fan brush. And what I do is I give them a little condiment cup with black glaze in it, but I don't tell them what it is. I just say, I'm going to give each of you a tile, I'm going to give each of you a cup of color, and I'm going to give you a brush, and I'm going to give you one simple instruction. I want you to apply one coat of this color to the tile. Don't ask questions. Well, you can ask questions, but there's a good chance I won't answer those questions until you're done. And so what I do is I kind of watch and I see, and generally the person that uses the real soft bristle brush, they get really nice even coverage. Look at how nice and black this tile is, even with just one coat of glaze. But that was using a really soft brush, which is going to lay the color on nice and smooth and even. Now, you're saying, hey, Mike, you told us that you could use gold Tackline for ceramic glazes. You can, but I purposely give a very small brush versus something that's bigger. And my point to them is, once I show them the tiles, if you use a small gold Tackline brush to do a large area, you're going to tend to get more streaks because you're not laying the color on as heavy as you would with a larger brush. So gold Tackline will work, but if you're doing a big area, use a big brush. Don't use something small. And then last is that hog bristle, which is the stiffest of the bristles, which a lot of people, I mentioned in the beginning, a lot of people get confused that they think it's the same hair, but it's not. This very stiff bristle is really going to drag that color, and you're going to get very streaky results. And so I save these tiles, I show them, and then I also take the little condiment cups and I say, okay, so the person who used the fan brush usually uses pretty much all of the color. The person that uses the round gold Tackline or the bristle brush, usually they have half to 3/4 of the color left in their cup. And I say, you guys, I gave you all the same instruction. Apply one coat of the color to this piece. And they're usually, it's a really good visual for them to see how much color is left, and they all did the same thing. They applied one coat. So it shows how the brush that you use does make a huge difference in your final results. So, you know, I know sometimes in the classroom you got to make do with one type of brush. And so if you have to do that, I tend to go toward the gold Tackline bristles because it is a very versatile bristle. If you can't afford watercolor brushes and ceramic brushes and different things like that. All right. The last brush that I want to talk to you about is the Aquaflow brush. And this brush is kind of cool because the way this works is the head on here screws off. The handle is hollow. Now, this handle can be filled with water by either putting it under the faucet and running the water in, or putting it in a bucket and squeezing it to get that to fill with water. And then you put the brush head back on. But before I do that, I want to show you the inside. On the inside of that, there is a little plastic disc with a hole. And that little plastic disc is what regulates how much water goes out of this brush. If you lose that plastic disc in there, you're going to have a lot more water going out of the brush. So when you wash these, don't take these apart and throw them in the sink. I had one of my daughter's teachers did that, and she had a lot of those discs popped out from sloshing them around in the sink to wash them, and she lost a lot of those plastic discs. So keep an eye on that disc in there. So the way this works then is you just squeeze the brush to get the water to come out of the bristle. And you don't need to squeeze real hard unless if you need a lot of water. So I always encourage teachers to have their students, before they use it, take this and hold it over something where they can squeeze it and get a feel that if I squeeze it hard, I can get a lot of water to come out of there. What teachers love about this brush is that with younger kids, they don't have to have a water bowl on the table. So there's no tapping of the brushes on the edge of that water bowl. There's no water spraying around, and they're not turning their watercolor cakes or their tempera cakes into a lake. Many of you have probably experienced that, where the kids, they're dipping their brush into the bowl of water. They've got water dripping from the bowl to their paint palette, and then they're stirring all of that water into the color. And so this is really nice because they just give it a gentle squeeze and they can get the color activated, and then they go on their paper or whatever surface they're working on, and they can paint with those watercolors or those tempera cakes. And if they need more water on the surface, they can give it a squeeze to get more water out. But with that hole in there, it will naturally allow water to go out that they probably don't need to squeeze a whole lot. You can also fill these with liquid watercolor. You can fill them with fluid ink. I've also got another video that I'm doing for the conference on the Azure Your Art. We use rubbing alcohol in here and use it with alcohol markers. There's Sharpie techniques where sometimes you'll use alcohol with them, and so you can use alcohol in here as well. Anything fluid that can make its way through that little hole in that plastic disc will work nice. Now, when you want to wash the brush out, what do? So, because there's no water bowl on the table, you don't need to have a water bowl. So the way you clean it out is, once you're done painting, just take this on a clean towel or a paper towel, give it a little squeeze, wipe it on the towel, and it washes the color right out of the bristles because you've got all that water in the handle. You can also, there was something, the other thing that teachers love about it for older kids and for younger kids and for adults is if you go outside to do painting or somewhere where you don't have a water source. Some teachers that work off of a cart, these are ideal because you don't need to have a bucket of water to carry with you. The water's in your handle when you're working with colors, and you don't need it to wash it out because you just squeeze it and scrub it on a paper towel. For students with special needs, I know a lot of you may have students that have a hard time holding a brush and working with it. You can fill this with something like liquid watercolor, and they can paint along, and they don't need to worry about dipping into water and dipping in and picking up the color. The color can be right in that handle. But when you're all done using them, again, just squeeze them, squeeze that water out. If you put liquid watercolor in here, then you'll want to take this apart, fill this with water, shake it, squeeze that dirty water out of there, fill it with clean water, and then squeeze it and work that water through the bristles to clean that color out of that brush. All right, so let's talk about brush care. And I always tell people brush care starts before you start painting. And I'll say that again. Brush care starts before you start painting. And why is that? So I encourage everybody to condition their brush before they start painting. So if you're working with any water-based colors, acrylics, watercolor, tempera, ceramic glazes, water-based inks, condition the brush by dipping it in water and working it in the palm of your hand. And what that does is it works that water into the middle of the hair in the brush. If you don't do that, How many of you have had flat brushes and round brushes that after a while the hair is just going out in every direction and it doesn't come to a nice point? And if you feel there's like dried up paint down in this area right by the ferrule of the brush, and it just causes those bristles to flare out that you don't get a point or a chisel edge. So what conditioning the brush does is by dampening that hair and working it in the palm of your hand, don't just dip it in water and then dip into paint, because you're going to have so much water in there that you're going to dilute your paint. Dip it in water, or if you're working with something that's not water-based, if it's an oil or something, dip it in some type of a cleaner or an oil to condition the brush, but work it into the middle of the brush. Because what happens then, especially with things like acrylic paint, when you dip into the paint and you start painting, if that brush isn't conditioned and wet all the way through, what happens to that paint that's down in the middle of the brush? It starts drying into the bristles. So by conditioning it and having it damp, that paint doesn't start to dry in the middle. It makes it a lot easier to clean the paint out of the brush when you do go to wash the brush. Again, if you're working with oil-based products, use some type of an oil or something to condition those bristles. The only time that you wouldn't condition the brush is if you're using like a hog bristle and you're doing a dry brushing technique where you don't want it real wet and you're getting most of that color out of the brush. That would be the exception to not conditioning the brush. But that will make the brush wash out a whole lot easier. By not conditioning the brush, what will happen is you'll get a little bit of a paint buildup in there, and then the next time you use it, you get a little bit more, and before you know it, your bristles are going out in every direction. So again, brush care starts before you start painting. Condition the brush before you use it. In between classes, I know that it's difficult to always clean the brushes thoroughly. Your students, some of them may do a good job of cleaning the brushes, some of them may not do a good job of cleaning the brushes. But the best thing to do is to rinse the brushes in water or whatever type of cleaner is most appropriate for them, and try to wash out all of the paint that you can. Don't slam them on the bottom of a water bowl, swish them. Sometimes I encourage teachers to put a sponge in the bottom of that water bowl so there's something that they can kind of rub those bristles against, or if they do press down, it goes into a soft sponge and not banging on the bottom of the water bowl. Have them wash the brushes out the best they can between classes. Now, at the end of the day, the best way to clean the brushes is to take a handful of them and clean them with soap. And I can't tell you the number of classrooms that I've gone in where I find teachers have things like Dawn dish soap or that orange antibacterial soap by their sink that they use for cleaning their brushes. Well, that's actually not real good for the brushes. And if you think about Dawn dish soap, when there is an oil spill, what do they use to clean the wildlife? They use Dawn dish soap. Why? Because it takes the grease or the oil away. And they used to have that commercial where that drop of Dawn would go into the dishwater and all of the grease would disperse around it. So when you're working with especially a natural hair brush, like goat hair or camel blends, that hair, if you use Dawn dish soap, it takes the natural oils out of that hair. Just like the hair on your head, you've got natural oils. So do the brushes. And so by using Dawn dish soap or antibacterial soaps and things with alcohol in them, they dry that hair out, makes it much more brittle, and it makes that hair break away a lot sooner with natural hair brushes. It's not as bad for synthetic hair brushes, but it's best to use, and I always tell people, I'm like, if you wouldn't use it on your head, you might want to think about, do you really want to use it on your brush? Brushes are hair, whether they're natural or synthetic, and so using inexpensive shampoo is good. Dollar store shampoo, Suave shampoo, a bottle of that next to the sink, and you can take the brushes, and I usually have a bowl of that shampoo. I dip a bunch of the brushes into it, and then I go and I work that in the palm of my hand to lather up and get those brushes really cleaned well. Rinse them well, and then wipe them on a piece of white paper or paper towel. And if no color comes out, the brushes are probably pretty clean. If you have color streaks coming out on that paper, redo that process, lather them up, rinse them well, and then lay them flat. How many of you, you can raise your hand if you want, even though I can't see you, how many of you have coffee cans or some type of container in your classroom where those brushes are stored upright? When I do this workshop in person, almost everybody in the class raises their hand, and then people will be like, nope, brush tips up, like, and they're like very proud of the fact that they learned this, that the brush tips should always be up. Well, brush tips you don't want to put this way in a can, but if you put them upright, where does all that water go that's in the hair? Yep, goes right down, and it sits on the glue that holds the bristles into the ferrule. It sits on the glue that might be holding the ferrule onto that acrylic handle. And if those brushes are upright like that every day that they are used, and that water is sitting in there, eventually it's going to break that glue down. So if you don't have one of our brush care trays that you got with your brush assortment, lay them flat so that that water doesn't go back into the brush. It also, if you've got any paint that you've not washed out of the brush, it kind of forces that paint down in, and especially ceramic glazes and things that are fritted and gritty and chalky, that can get compressed down in by the ferrule because you stand them upright and that water wants to go down and kind of force that in there. So lay the brushes flat, or like I mentioned, our brush care trays, we used to have metal caddies that held the brushes, and teachers stood them upright. And I was like, that's really not a good idea, because we're showing the teachers the wrong way to store the brushes. Now, the instructions on those said to lay them flat, and after they're dry, you can stand them up, and that's okay. But this brush care tray comes with most of our brush assortments now. And the way this is designed is on the bottom of the tray, see if I can do this without dumping all the brushes out, see those little feet on there? The ones on the bottom end where my pinky is pointing, those are a little bit higher than the ones up on the top. And so this tray is designed so it's sloped. And so the water, when you lay the brushes in here, will run away from the brushes, and it goes through these openings on the end that's sloped lowest. And then the lid to your tray acts to catch the water below. Once the brushes have drained, take that lid, dump the water out, put your lid back on your tray, and you've got your storage container, and you can stack these up multiple layers high. But if you don't have the brush storage tray, please lay them flat until they are dry. I'm just going to look here and see some of the, I had mentioned the troubleshooting section in here. And so some of the things are, you know, why does the paint flake off of my wood handle? And I kind of explain that. It's usually moisture. And so when I have customers come up at shows and things, or they contact me and they say, you know, I used this brush one time and all the paint flaked off of the handle. And usually my question to them is, did it get left in water? And a lot of times they'll be like, nope, nope, I never leave the brushes in water. And then I'll say to them, I said, okay, tell me how you clean the brushes and store them. And they go through their cleaning process. And then most of the time they say, and then I stand them up in some type of a container. And then when I explain to them, I'm like, where does all that water go? On a wood handle, that water goes down into the ferrule, and the wood handle will absorb the moisture. So when wood handle brushes are made, these handles are dipped. And so they're kind of held up on the top with a machine. There isn't a person sitting there dipping every single handle that dips that handle. So there's a little area up here where the ferrule is crimped onto a wood handle where there isn't any paint. So there's bare wood. So all of that water goes down into that bare wood, causes the handle to expand, just like leaving it sitting in water. So again, very important that the brushes lay flat or in the tray to avoid having that paint flaking off the handles. I talked about the fan brushes losing hair in the middle. Why are my brush heads coming off of the handles? I kind of talked about that too, that if that wood expands on an inexpensive brush, that ferrule can stretch if it's a real inexpensive aluminum, and then that head falls off of the brush. Now, you can put some glue back in there, put that back on, twist it, and reattach it to the handle. On acrylic handle brushes, That is the one, and I hate to say negative about acrylic handle brushes, but on acrylic, it looks like there's a crimp here, and honestly, that's just decorative that that crimp is on there. On a wood handle brush, this is put into something that comes around and pinches the metal, and so you actually have an indentation which goes into the wood because the wood can give. On acrylic handles, it can't give, so it relies on the glue to hold that ferrule onto the acrylic handle. Now, if a student fidgets and they go like this and they bend it back and forth or are kind of rough with it, they can snap that glue in there. If that head comes off, just put a little super glue in there, and then as you put that head back on there, kind of twist it as you put it on so it coats the whole top of the handle and the inside of that with the glue, and you'll get a good bond on there. Sometimes brushes get dropped on the floor, they get stepped on, they get banged around. That's, the glue can give way in there. Just put a little glue in there and reattach that head onto the handle. Why are my brushes losing hair? That can be that, again, if they stand upright like this and that water sits on that glue that holds that together, over time that can break down and be rough on the brush. Drying the bristles out using things like Dawn dish soap instead of a nice shampoo on the brushes. You can also use conditioner. People ask, can I use conditioner on my brushes? Again, it's hair. Would you use conditioner on your hair? Yeah, if you want it to be soft feeling. So using conditioner on brushes is not a bad idea. And sometimes in between, if you're not in session during the summer and the brushes aren't going to be used, you can actually take these brushes and lather them up with conditioner and kind of pull them. I shouldn't say pull them, but kind of bring them to a point or a chisel edge. Leave that conditioner in there over the summer months, and then in fall, just wash that conditioner out. That's also good for the brushes. Hair in the middle of the fan brushes, I talked about that. What causes the entire brush head to fall down into the ferrule? So you might have a brush like this and you're not losing the hair out this way, but that whole head slides down inside. That can be caused by the glue giving way inside here. Again, standing the brushes upright, that can be a negative for that glue. But there are times that you may get a brush here or there where there isn't maybe enough glue in there, or there's something happened in manufacturing. And Royal makes millions of brushes every single month, and they're made by hand. There are machines used for steps in this process, but these are assembled by hand. And so if somebody doesn't get quite enough glue on there, or the glue isn't mixed properly, you may get a brush here or there that the head can fall down in, the hair can fall out, things can happen. If that happens to you and the brushes are fairly new and you've taken care of the brushes, reach out to the supplier where you've gotten them or contact Royal Brush and we'll see about getting you a replacement if it is a defect in the brush. We want you guys to be happy with our brushes. And then it talks about the plastic cap. Should I save that plastic cap on there? And those are some of the most common questions that I get. There was also a brochure here. There will be a PDF of this that you can download. And this just talks about the brush tray and how it works. And then kind of talks about different types of brushes. And then on the back side, this is really handy because this shows in our Clear Choice line. Our Clear Choice line, there's pretty much every type of bristle, and it talks about the different hair types and what their best uses are, and it shows you an example of what those hair types look like. So I hope that this information was really helpful and useful. If you do have questions, you can reach out to me. My email address is mike.harbridge, M-I-K-E, period, H-A-R-B as in boy, R-I-D as in dog, G-E, at royalbrush.com. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have or help you figure out what brushes are best for you. Now, Royal doesn't sell direct to teachers or to school districts. And so you'll find our brushes through all of your favorite catalog suppliers like Blick, NASCO, School Specialty, United Art, a lot of specialty stores and things also carry our brushes. And you'll find lots and lots of different options for you. So thank you again for watching this workshop. I hope that you got some good information in here that will help you take care of your brushes and select the proper brushes for your classroom. Take care.